So, Michael, about 2 weeks ago, I was watching the Hungarian Grand Prix, the Formula One Hungarian Grand Prix in Budapest. And fantastic race, by the way. Esteban Ocon picked up his first win. Lewis Hamilton charged through the field from last to third, and there was a big crash at turn one. But despite all of that action, something else caught my eye that weekend, which was a couple of protests from drivers regarding the political situation in Hungary. Mainly the fact that, from their point of view, Hungary wasn't doing the best thing in terms of gay rights. In fact, they were suppressing gay rights. Sebastian Vettel wore a mask with a pride flag on it. Lewis Hamilton, before the race, put a message up on his Instagram encouraging his followers to vote against new laws proposed by the government which would criminalise gay rights in Hungary. And I did some more digging and I found out that there is a Prime Minister of Hungary and he is called, Viktor Orban. Viktor Orban is his name, and he's not a nice guy. Apparently, he's not a nice guy. So I did some reading on Mr. Orban, and apparently he's an anti-Semite, he's a homophobe, he's a racist, he's a white nationalist, etc. All very bad things. And I thought, oh, this guy isn't good. I can't imagine, any political talk show host from another country would fly into their country and, do a segment on how great this guy, Viktor Orban, is. But then, guess what happened about a week ago, Michael?
If I had to guess, just a complete guess, it would be that Tucker Carlson flew out to Hungary to go speak to Viktor Orban and praise him and say that he was doing wonderful things for the country. But that's just a guess.
Yeah, well, you're right, because that did happen. And of course, today's video, as you can tell, is why is Viktor Orban a hero to the global right wing? Why did Tucker Carlson, who's from America, one of the most influential countries in the world, why did he fly all the way to Budapest to praise this guy who some have called a dictator? Well, Michael, let the man tell you himself. Here is a clip of Tucker Carlson explaining why he decided to go to Hungary just a couple of weeks ago. Let's watch.
Good evening and welcome to Tucker Carlson. Tonight we're coming to you this evening from Budapest, Hungary, right over the Danube River. It's a place we're going to be telling you a lot about in coming days. If you care about Western civilization and democracy and families and the ferocious assault on all three of those things by the leaders of our global institutions, you should know what is happening here right now.
So that's why he's over there. Hungary is extremely important for Western civilization, Michael. Western civilization. Whatever could Tucker Carlson, he hosts one of the most influential shows in the world in terms of politics, like in America, certainly an incredibly influential country, to say the least. One of the most popular political shows. Why is he going over to Hungary? Well, there you go. It's because of Western civilization. And the fact that Hungary, is defending Western civilization, I guess, promoting it. What do you think of all this, Michael?
No, yeah, I mean, I'm glad that Tucker Carlson, who obviously is in no way a incredibly wealthy person who, is part of the media establishment, I'm glad that he's there to, obviously explain how Viktor Orban's standing up to the elite, who of course Tucker Carlson would have nothing to do with. Obviously, I guess what really it is that Tucker Carlson is an ideologue, and he thinks that Viktor Orban's policies are in some way reflective of what he thinks his viewers would consider to be the ideal country, and I fear that he might be right.
Yeah, absolutely. I think obviously what Carlson was doing going over there was showing his viewers, I mean, he admits it in some other clip, that, Hungary isn't that well-known a country, it's got a smaller GDP than the state of New York, but why it's interesting for him and why he likes it is because the American right wing, after Donald Trump, lost the election in 2020, they're feeling a bit desperate, they're feeling a bit down, and so they're looking for an idealized society abroad, basically. Something to aim for in their own country. That's why Carlson is over there in Hungary. If you remember, Michael, Edward Mosley did this in the 1930s in the UK when he, was a big supporter of the Nazis. He thought the Nazi Party or the policies of the Nazi Party should come over here to Britain. And there was many elites across Europe who were big fans of the Nazis because they believed in hierarchy. The Nazis, of course, believed in hierarchy as well. So that was a nice fit. And of course, Hungary is something that for the modern right wing, for Carlson, for many conservatives across the globe, Hungary is something that they would like to aspire to. I think beforehand you could say that was definitely Israel, but Israel, that there is a problem with that. A lot of, in the Western world, of course, a lot of, the right wingers are Christian. Israel is, of course, a Jewish country, so it's not a perfect fit. But Hungary, of course, it's Christian, and also the fact that I think Benjamin Netanyahu has gone from Israel. He's no longer the prime minister. He was a real lodestar for the global right wing. Now he's gone, and now I think Carlson recognises that Hungary could be the replacement. And why could Hungary be the replacement? Well, Viktor Orban offers a possibility that there could be a country that exists in the West where minorities are discriminated against. There are, no immigrants. There was this great photo of Tucker Carlson going to Hungary's border and looking at a border fence and nodding his head like, yep, that's a good border fence right there. Gay rights are being basically crushed. And on the social side of things, that's all the stuff that conservatives want, because an inherent part of conservatism is bigotry. Therefore, again, after Trump is gone, it makes sense that American conservatives are staring wistfully at a place where all of that is now a possibility and is happening. And of course, it happens to be in this small country in Central Europe, in Hungary, and Viktor Orban is the spearhead of that movement.
I think one of the problems for a lot of conservatives is that their ideas don't really gel that well with established liberal democracy. I mean, they can get a decent amount of the way there, but ultimately the idea of liberal democracy is, of course, that everybody should have a voice, everybody should have certain inalienable rights, and you can't really have those beliefs if you're going to argue for dehumanizing large portions of the population. So where do those kind of ideas thrive? Where do the ideas that conservatives really endorse thrive? They succeed in places that are ironically outside of what was traditionally considered Western civilization. Because obviously, if you look at traditional clash of civilization narratives, obviously centered around the Cold War quite recently, the Eastern Europe was not considered really to be a place that was like a bastion for Western values or something like that. But now they've decided that's the place they have to go to in order to say, well, these are the values we want. I think you can see that in other right-wing instances, like that. For example, there are lots of right-wingers who really love Bashar al-Assad. Like I've seen Nazis be like, Bashar al-Assad, he's the guy we really love. And of course, Bashar al-Assad, there's some reasons why you can imagine maybe Nazis would not be that enthusiastic about him. But the reality is that Western liberal democracy does not accommodate for the extremes of authoritarianism that extremist right-wing populists would prefer.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, if you think about a democracy, liberalism, what it wants to do, well, if you take it at good faith, is basically it wants to give a voice to everyone. It wants to kind of dismantle hierarchies. And that is something that conservatism is inherently against. It promotes hierarchies. So it would make sense that, yes, liberalism and conservatism don't mix that well, and therefore conservatives have to look to other countries which are not liberal. Indeed, Viktor Orban has said that he does not want Hungary to be liberal. He wants it to be an illiberal country, basically. And therefore, Tucker Carlson, other people can point to Hungary and be like, yes, that is the country I want to live in. It can be possible in quote-unquote the West. We can do it. It doesn't have to be how it is in our country.
And I remember you were mentioning Tim Montgomery too, weren't you?
Yes, I was. So Tim Montgomery was a former aide of Boris Johnson, and as you can see on screen, he wanted the UK and Viktor Orban's Hungary to have a special relationship after Brexit. And in the byline, as you can see, it says, Tim Montgomery praised the interesting early thinking on the limits of liberalism, by Hungary's authoritarian government at an event hosted by a right-wing think tank. So yeah, just adding to what we've said, there are right-wingers in the West who like the fact that Hungary is basically pushing the limits. They are interested and admire what Hungary is doing, and they want to see some of the things repeated in the UK. And of course, if that like the phrase "the limits of liberalism," that's quite a dark phrase, really, if you think about it.
I think the real limit of liberalism is that they're not willing to take these fascists out and line them up against the wall. Am I right? Am I right, my fellow tankies? No, yeah, I mean, that's the thing. Like, obviously, you could say that any political system has its limits, but it's pretty ominous to be like, to point to Hungary specifically as your example of like, how there are limits to liberalism. Like, for example, if we said that certain, like, Slavoj Žižek makes an interesting point about the limits of liberalism, it would be obvious what we're talking about. We're not praising right-wing reactionaries. We're talking about how, and obviously we've mentioned this on this channel before, liberalism in the traditional sense, meaning kind of like Democrats, liberal Democrats, Keir Starmer, isn't necessarily the best thing ever. But if you're saying, oh, I'm against liberalism, and here's my example of what I think's better, Viktor Orban, a guy who is basically like, we can just say the closest thing that continental Europe, or indeed anywhere in Europe, has to like a modern Hitler. Like, I hate to do the Godwin's law thing, but he basically is. I mean, to be honest, you did it already with the when you were talking about Oswald Mosley. So yeah, I'm gonna say it too. And that's the person you're pointing to as like an interesting example of the limits of liberalism. I definitely agree with you that ominous is the right word.
Yes, ominous is the right word, Michael. However, Michael, of course, Viktor Orban, despite claiming to rail against the globalists, the elites in society, there have been accusations he is maybe a bit of a hypocrite and is not on the side of the Hungarian people, as it were, and is maybe a bit of a grifter. You've got some info on this, haven't you?
Yes, Luke. Basically, Viktor Orban had obviously some buddies of his, some might say cronies, who he, obviously became associated with as he was kind of rising up the ranks to power. And it just so happens that a suspicious number of his closest friends seem to have done very well under his leadership. So, first of all, you have this guy called Andy Vojna, who was just a kind of independent film producer. But soon after Viktor Orban became Prime Minister, he then became the Hungarian Film Commissioner. Now, he also got several other benefits as well, like he got some licenses to run some new casinos, and also he got some favourable loan conditions from some Hungarian banks. But the point is, a lot of this stuff is kind of very small. He's got two friends called István Goronski and István Tiborcs, who again have had sort of smaller advantages under Viktor Orban's leadership, but obviously he tries to keep it small. But one big example is his friend Mezhroj Lorinc, who used to just own a small oil company in the village that Viktor Orban himself is from. And now that Viktor Orban is in charge, he's got some pretty substantial construction projects, including a railway station to their shared village, which was deemed to be completely unnecessary because it's not got a particularly large population. But Viktor Orban said, you know what, actually, let's build it and let's pay my friend Mezhroj Lorinc a big sum of money to do it. And perhaps the biggest instance of this corruption in terms of cash value has been a bridge over the Danube to connect Hungary with Slovakia. Originally, it was going to be done by a Slovakian company for a decent amount of money, and then suddenly Viktor Orban comes in and changes at the last minute and says, no, actually, we're going to give it to this Hungarian company, Mezhroj, which happens to be owned by Mezhroj Lorinc, and they've agreed to do it for 117 million euros. And the also good news is that 85% of that has been covered by the European Union's Connecting Europe facility, which is basically a European grant given for infrastructure in countries which are not doing so great economically. So that's just a brief overview of how much Viktor Orban has enriched his friends, and again, some might say cronies, at the cost of the Hungarian taxpayer, and of course Europe in general, by having these unnecessary infrastructure projects sometimes, and even when they have been necessary or useful, he has agreed to pay higher prices to companies that happen to be run by his friends.
Wow, that's crazy, Michael. So even though Viktor Orban is seen, some might say as this noble saviour, indeed seems like he is a bit of a grifter. Wow, who could have seen that coming, hey? What a shock. Just like Donald Trump, perhaps, just like maybe even in our own country, Boris Johnson. I mean, you're talking about all the things that Orban has done to enrich his friends. That sounds a lot like what has been going on in the UK in the last 2 years, or certainly since the 2019 general election. Obviously, Matt Hancock has been accused of doing some stuff, the health secretary, which was, quite corrupt on the face of it. You also have a lot of other contracts in government going to friends of Boris Johnson, Conservative Party donors, and also rich businessmen also given peerages in the House of Lords by the Conservative Party as well. So yeah, all of that stuff, not exactly the most uncorrupt thing you've ever heard of, is it? And of course, I mentioned Britain. Donald Trump was quite infamous for some corruption going on there in the White House while he was in charge, while he was president of the United States. So,
while he was draining the swamp, Luke.
Oh yes, he was. That was what he was doing, draining that swamp. Oh, he drained it so good, man, so good. But yeah, the similarities to these leaders, of course, cannot go unnoticed. But the question to now ask, Michael, is why is this corruption in the UK, in the United States, in Hungary? Why is it tolerated by the populations there? Because, corruption is bad. People don't like it, or people are meant not to like it. Now, here's the thing. I think the media control is a factor. The fact that Donald Trump in the United States has Fox News basically saying how great he is every single day. In the UK, you have, of course, a lot of papers, like probably 80% of UK media on the side of the Conservative Party, which definitely helps. That barrage of opinion influences, supposedly neutral organisations like, say, the BBC and ITV. And of course, that really helps in the 2019 general election against Jeremy Corbyn, no doubt about it. You could probably increase the media support from the Conservatives from 80% to about 95% in 2019. And also, of course, in Hungary, Viktor Orban, it is well known that he has a stranglehold on the media. The media isn't really allowed to say how bad things are in Hungary and how badly his government is doing on many things like, say, corruption. So that is something that has to be mentioned as to why these populations put up with this corruption. But you have anything else to say on that, Michael?
Yeah, I think that I remember seeing, I think it was actually Nerdwriter, mentioning how Donald Trump was very good at kind of directing where the media would put their focus. And I think the example he gave was that when there was going to be there was a kind of piece of investigative journalism published that was basically listing all of the potential conflicts of interest that could be in Trump's presidency. And literally minutes after that kind of story dropped, Trump tweeted the famous line about how he not only won the election by a landslide, but even the popular vote if you ignore the millions of people who voted illegally. And the point is, it seems like that was kind of coordinated. That the point was, as this important piece of investigative journalism is coming out that makes some genuine, legitimate criticisms of Trump and how he could be corrupt, Trump comes out and just hits really hard with this idea that there's actually all of this corruption in terms of the election. And I think that's something the right wing, I think most obviously Donald Trump, I think Viktor Orban probably does it as well, is just going in so hard with the wild accusations against your opposition that it's almost like you suck all of the oxygen out of the room. So Viktor Orban can say the global elite are trying to force Muslims into this country to, sexually assault all of our daughters and stuff. And meanwhile, you've just got some investigative journalists well, I've got something about this construction of a bridge in the Danube. And it's that. I think that's a good analogy for it. They suck the oxygen out of the room by just going so hard. I think Boris Johnson does this to a lesser extent, but definitely Orban and Trump just, like I say, suck all the oxygen out of the room with their wild accusations that just mean that the media sort of has to focus on what they're talking about. And so I think that aspect of directing attention is also another asset they have in addition to their direct control over certain media outlets.
So yeah, I think that's a good point. Like, direct control of the media is important, but also indirect control of the media. Getting the media to go where you want them to go is also an important tactic here for these leaders. But I think there is another factor that allows these leaders to be tolerated by their populations in America, the United Kingdom, and also Hungary, of course, with Viktor Orban. And it's that as long as immigrants, well, basically, quote-unquote, undesirables, like foreigners, people who aren't white or Christian in the sense of, Hungary, or who aren't straight, as long as they aren't getting it good, then that's a fine trade-off. They will allow this corruption to go on in their country as long as they themselves are not getting shafted. And I think there is an acknowledgement among populations, like in Hungary and even in our country. Okay, it's fine for our leaders to be corrupt as long as they look after us, right? As long as Trump looks after his supporters, he can do what he likes, and in the case of Hungary, white Christians, and crack down on others. And this has been the attitude in many Western countries, and I think that does explain how corruption, which is out in the open and everybody knows about, has been tolerated. And I think this attitude among these populations has become quite dominant, certainly on the right-wing side of things, since the 2008 financial crisis. I think after the 2008 financial crisis in countries, say, like Hungary, it was, incredibly damaging. And it's a case of, well, you know what, it's fine, you do what you like, just look after us, the people who deserve to be looked after, like the true people of this country. And you can, put in people in the UK who think they're the true people, the ones that deserve the most recognition and deserve the best treatments, etc. And in America as well, basically people who aren't ethnic minorities, people who aren't immigrants. And yeah, I think the right-wing parties have adapted to this and have gone in this direction. It could also happen in France as well with Marine Le Pen. I think the right wing in general have given up on the idea that life can be made better in the West, and flag-waving crackdowns on people who we don't like is the only way to go. I think that's what Trump wanted to do, that's what conservatives in the UK want to do, and that's what Viktor Orban has done so much more than anyone else. And that is why this corruption is tolerated, because, yeah, at the end of the day, there's some shady dealings. I think the population kind of knows that, or the supporters of Orban, but as long as they're looking after me, as long as they're on my side, then that's all I care about. And yeah, I think since 2008, because of the financial instability that recession caused, I think that has been quite a dominant attitude, and it's why since 2008 you see all these kind of authoritarian far-right figures like Orban rise across the globe. So yeah, what do you think of that, Mike?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're basically right. Although something I'd want to stress is that it's not necessarily even selfishness in the traditional sense, and the reason I say that is because I don't think it's true that all of these kind of policies of Donald Trump or Viktor Orban or whoever is to the advantage of a specific group of people, and indeed not to the advantage of a lot of the people who support these people. The Hungary as a whole has got poorer, more in debt. They've had less money for public services. The country has just overall been in a worse situation because of Orban's policies. And it's definitely true that is extending to the supporters of Viktor Orban. There's no way that it's not as if, I guess what I'm saying, it's not as if it's like a zero-sum game where it's like these right-wing populists are taking money from the, let's say that.
But I think the key thing is here, as long as people who we don't like are doing worse,
I think
that's okay.
That's kind of what I was about to say, because obviously I think the thing that I remember hearing is the classic Lyndon B. Johnson quote, if you can convince I'm not going to get it perfectly, but if you can convince the working class white Southern American that he is better off than his black neighbor or by other black people in his community, then he will be contented. I think that is basically it. So it's worth stressing that it's almost like it's not even like yes, we're supporting these people because they make life better for us. The reality is even sadder, which is we're supporting these people who make life worse for us and who literally sell us out to enrich themselves, make themselves powerful, and make all of their friends powerful in this, basically.
Yeah, and I think that attitude wouldn't have been acceptable until the 2008 financial crisis.
Yeah, I think that's true as well.
A lot of these people were like, well, it's kind of a zero-sum game. So, yeah, okay, well, some people have got to lose. Okay, you're going to lose more than us, and we'll support the politicians that advance that, even if they themselves get very rich. Again, it's very depressing. But yeah, that explains, I think, Orban's rise and Trump. And yeah, and it explains why also it would be so depressing to see situations like Viktor Orban repeated across the world. But anyway, that is it for this video. And hopefully there will be no more Viktor Orban. Indeed, Viktor will be Orbanned from Hungary. You like that?
I didn't like that.
Okay.
Yeah.
See you next time. Goodbye.